Okay, this is Intimacy Part 8 and our last video in the series. We're going to call this Romance and When It's Appropriate, obviously in quotes there. So if you're following along with your textbook, you're going to see that we're going to cover those phases of romance, and then we're going to pop back, talk about early and late matures, and then go back to where we left off with some material on when it's appropriate to start dating. Okay, so there are 3 phases of romance according to the research. Kind of indicates the evolution of romance for adolescents, and it goes through 3 distinct stages or phases. The first one, which is roughly about 11 to 13 years old, at this phase of romance, adolescents are interested in socializing with a potential partner, and this could be in kind of that mixed group setting that doesn't really have couples within it. Once a relationship does happen, it doesn't tend to last. It's actually quite short-lived, with the average lasting only a few weeks. The main purpose of romantic activity in this first stage is all about establishing, improving, and maintaining social status. Because if you have a significant other, you're looked at more favorably by your peers at that stage. Okay, stage or phase 2. This is around ages 14 to 16, and in this phase, adolescents slowly move toward more meaningful relationships. Now, dating is still very casual, often occurs in group contexts with those little group dates that we talked about in the previous video, but we do start to see an increase in emotional attachment, but it's more like passion and preoccupation than anything else. And in this stage, the average romance lasts about 6 months. So the last stage, beginning around 17 or 18, involves adolescents giving thought to long-term survival and growth of their romantic attachment. There's more concern for commitment, and there's much more care for the relationship. If there is tensions, it usually revolves around the give and take from intimacy with your partner and just having individual autonomy, so having that alone time. But in this stage, you do almost exclusively spend time just as a couple, which may explain my prior statement. The average length of relationship at this age, at 18, is more than a year, and we also start to see much more significant impact on a person's mental health than any of those earlier phases. Now, I know that we have been very binary with our conversations with the sexes and dating and things like that. And I did kind of put that disclaimer in an earlier video that this is the way your textbook is phrased, and so we are kind of going to follow suit. However, we do need to mention the LGBTQIA plus community, because these 3 phases of romance are not as applicable to this group when you are comparing them to heterosexual adolescents, right? So there's a lot of stigma and stereotypes, and unfortunately, they make development of intimate relationships for adolescents far more complicated. And in an effort to kind of avoid public harassment, or to avoid homophobic reactions, a lot of times LGBTQIA plus individuals or adolescents will they just won't have displays of public intimacy with their partner. They might actually pursue sexual activity outside the context of a dating relationship, and they might find it difficult to develop intimate relationships in general because of fear of that negative stigma and that negative social harassment. So a little bit different for those individuals. So back to this slide. When does dating begin, or when is a good time to begin? Okay, we are now going to talk about that. So if you are following along in your textbook, we're going to go back. We're going to talk about the role of context in dating, early matures, when dating begins, and we're going to save that exact date for the very last bit. But that's kind of where we're going to move to. So, when to date? Well, let's first start with what predicts when to date. Again, if you're following along with your textbook, we're on page 282. The age at which dating begins is definitely influenced by the norms and expectations of the adolescents' surrounding community and culture, actually. Oh, sorry for that little noise. And culture, maybe even religion. So we have that as first and foremost. We also have the aspect of early and late matures, because we see early matures begin dating somewhat earlier than late matures. And age norms within the adolescent's school and peer group are one of the most important predictors in determining the age at which dating begins with adolescents. It's a much better, I should say, predictor of age at which dating begins than even physical development of the adolescent. There's a lot of correlational predictors of early dating. I will run through a few. So having an older sibling who is dating, not being as close to your parents, living with a single mother, family instability, not having parental monitoring, all of those things could be correlational predictors. But we need to remember throughout all of this that correlation does not mean causation. I did mention family instability. That is especially true with boys, actually. Adolescents and boys specifically who come from unstable families are more likely to date and even more likely to have multiple partners. So moving forward, going to where we left off on page 282 in your textbook, we're going to ask this question. Well, what if dating actually does happen too early? And really, we want to know what too early is. The research on this mainly focuses on girls, so all of these correlates I'll be giving to you are about girls. Why do we focus on girls? Because girls generally date earlier than boys. Okay, mainly we see many negative correlates and negative outcomes. So, poor mental health that gets consistently reported for more than 50 years. That is pretty huge. They're less socially mature, less imaginative, don't really care about achievement in life, not really happy with who they are or how they look, more depressed, more likely to have an eating disorder, generally do not do well in school, more likely to be involved in delinquency, more likely to be involved in antisocial behavior, and more likely to use and abuse substances. So in sum, there is evidence that girls who get involved in serious romances at a young age are different from their peers, even before they start dating. There's evidence about that. It's also been suggested that there's a link between early dating and poor mental health, and it might have something to do with the pressures on girls to engage in sexual activity, maybe even before they are willing or psychologically ready to do so. So yikes, that is a lot of negative outcomes. But we have to ask another question. What if you don't date at all? What happens to those adolescents who just say no to dating, or maybe they are socially resistant, I'll say, to dating? Unfortunately, it doesn't actually have good outcomes either. It shows that those adolescents have delayed social development and many more feelings of insecurity when compared to those who actually do date. So, what age does the research recommend you start dating? Or maybe allow your child to date? Well, according to the research, there is a moderate degree a moderate degree of dating, and that is a direct quote from your textbook, is okay in adolescence because it can actually be healthy. Again, it helps with social status. There's some potential positive mental health outcomes. It does help with the development of intimacy. However, research shows that you should not have a serious involvement with a romantic partner until around age 15. And there are many reasons for that your textbook actually doesn't get into, and I was kind of surprised. But at that age, obviously an adolescent is not fully cognitive aware and able to weigh risk and reward as well as an adult. Planning ahead, not as well as an adult, and still does lack some cognitive skill. But by age 15, as we learned in a previous module, you are quite cognitively aware of things much more than you were earlier. You have capabilities to make better decisions. And speaking of intimacy, since this is our module, you have the ability to share more intimate conversations because of your increased cognitive ability. But as with everything in this class, everybody is a little bit different. So we're going to chant our mantra again: variability, variability, variability. And that's going to conclude this video and conclude this lecture module.